Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Hi, Build Stuff. You made it to the end of the conference. Thank you so much for choosing to be with me in this room to finish it out. There's a lot of great content. I've been here the past 2 days, and I've seen some wonderful talks. There's some talks going on right now that I should rather be in than this one. But thank you very much for choosing to be with me. I appreciate it. My name's Damian. This is the Hidden Requirements, Exploring Emotions with Placebos. A couple quick notes. This was originally designed to be between a half and a full day workshop. There's exercises, activities throughout that typically we spend 10 to 15 minutes working on exploring emotional requirements, and we discuss them, make observations about them. That said, I've also given this as an hour keynote several times where all the exercises are cut out. Today's about in between that time, so I'm going to talk about the exercises, although we won't do them, so you get a taste of what the full thing is like. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Damian Synadinos from Columbus, Ohio in the U.S. Just turned 50 last month, and I did software testing for 25 years. At the age of 19, I had already been around computers for much of my life. I was at the Ohio State University taking computer science, and a friend of the family got me a job as an intern at CompuServe, if you've ever heard of that company. It was how you used to get online way back in the late 80s, early 90s. So I started working in the quality assurance department at CompuServe. And after a few years, I left and joined another company, and over 25 years, I worked at 15 different companies in very diverse industries, from airline, education, retail, finance, insurance. All of them had different jobs, different functions, different purposes for existing, but all of them involve software, and that requires testing and quality. So that's how I was involved in all these different companies. For much of my career, I did automated testing and automated functional, automated performance testing. Also in Columbus, Ohio, there's a software testing conference called QA or the Highway. I helped run that for 9 years. So I've got a lot of software testing experience. I've also done a little bit of consulting work as a BA, and as an automator, I was writing code. So I knew some of the older languages that are now like learning Latin anymore. They're all dead. But that's some of my tech experience. Also, we're going to be talking a lot about emotions. So I want to tell you some other aspects about me and how they might apply today. I also did improv comedy for 15 years. Who here saw me talk 2 days ago? Anybody? Okay, a few hands, great. So we did some improv in that workshop, and I learned improv for about a year. I took classes and training, and after that I formed a troupe, and we performed hundreds of shows over 15 years, standing on stage doing improv comedy. I'm also married. I got a wife and 2 young kids, 10 and 12, Alina and Zachary. They're wonderful. I'm also an artist, so I draw commissions. I sometimes make speaker decks with custom art for other speakers. I've written a children's book. It's called Hank and Stella and Something from Nothing. Stickers if you want them. You can read the book for free online, and it teaches children life skills through improv comedy. So I mention all these things because I've already told you about my technical background and my involvement in IT through the years, but what do these other things have to do with anything? Emotions. As an artist, when I'm drawing for somebody, I might be trying to evoke emotions without words at all, just through images. So I'm trying to make them feel a certain way. Obviously, with my wife and kids, I have to be very attuned to their emotions. I am emotionally sensitive to my children in different ways that I'm emotionally sensitive to my wife. As an improviser, I'm trying to connect with the audience and entertain them and amuse them and try and connect with them emotionally. And same thing with my fellow actors on stage. So all these different things involve emotions. And I'm not unique in this regard. All of us are experts in emotions because we've been dealing with them and experiencing them our entire lives. So although I don't have any formal training, it's a very interesting subject to me. I've dived deep into it, and we all have lifetime experience. So that's a little bit about me. You ready to go? Let's do this. All right. So if you were in my talk 2 days ago, I like to start with why. I think if you understand the purpose, the reason, the goal that you do something, it helps you better understand what to do and then how to do it. Because all the whats and all the hows can be tracked back, and if they're supporting the why, you know that you're on target. So why are we here? Not in the existential sense on this earth, but why did you choose this session today? I'm curious. Anyone? Yes.
And there he touched a topic that when people vote, they usually answer the question not what do they think, but what do they feel.
Very interesting.
And it means that many of the solutions that regular people do every day are driven by emotions.
Very, very true. I'm going to touch on exactly that topic in just a short bit. Absolutely. So that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. So something about that book and you're being interested in this topic drew you to this this room. All right, great reason. Anybody else want to share why you decided this over any other session today? All right, the tension's enough. Everyone in here chose it for some reason. Whether you want to raise your hand and share it or not, everyone's here for some reason, maybe multiple reasons. And there's no wrong reason. But I appreciate you being here. So I'll suggest a couple reasons. Maybe you're here because you are a business analyst, or you're making software in some way, shape, or form. And this should apply to everyone that helps make software, regardless of what your role or title is. This should apply to you. So maybe you're curious to learn more about requirements. You saw that in the title. Maybe you saw the word placebos, and you're like, oh, I've heard about placebos. I'd like to learn more about them. Maybe that was interesting. But maybe the way we feel about software is important. That's in the abstract. How many people read the abstract? Okay, great. It's usually about half the hands, so I'm glad about that. This is in the abstract. It's a claim. The way we feel about software is important. I believe it to be true, and this might be something in the abstract that you saw and thought, well, that's a pretty bold claim. I want to see if this is true or not. I'm curious to find out more. Now, with any claim, it should be supported by evidence, by facts. Otherwise, it's just a hollow claim. Who can say if it's true or not? It's my word against something else. So what I'm going to do is try and support this claim. And after I think I've sufficiently supported it, then I'm going to give you some actionable items on what to do once you believe it to be true. Now, some of you may believe this to be true already, so you can get some more information. Some of you may be slightly skeptical, and some of you may think this is nonsense. Well, I hope to reach you and change your mind. So about half the time I'm going to spend supporting. The other half is offering advice and suggestions. I'm going to do that by first supporting the claim through some quotations by famous, notable folks. Next, I'm going to talk about the purpose of software. Software has a purpose, but what is it? How many of us actually thought about that? Research into this exact topic, the importance of emotions in software. I'm going to talk about that. And then finally, I'm going to dig into requirements. It's in the title of the talk. What exactly are requirements? I'm going to go deeper than perhaps you've ever gone before. And after that point, hopefully you're on board and you say, all right, I agree. I agreed before, and now I finally agree that the way we feel about emotions is important. And then I'm going to talk about emotional requirements, how to get them, how to develop them, how to test them. And finally, we'll look at software through the lens of a placebo to see if we can gain any extra insight. Okay. So first, here's one of those exercises. So again, I'll just talk about the exercise since we only have 90 minutes. What I usually do is just for fun, to get the crowd warmed up and thinking about emotions, is I play a game called Say It With Feeling. So oftentimes we think that the words are the main part of the message, and they are a large part of the message, but there's also body language and facial expression and tone of voice and speed and pitch and all these other things that impact the message that you're giving to someone that can affect how they interpret it. So I created something called the emotional deck. And I hand out these cards to different people in the audience, and they look secretly at the card. And I have anybody that wants to play raises their hand, and they say this sentence: we have enough food to last for a week. But they have to embody one of those emotions, and everyone else in the room has to try and guess the emotion. And it's a very interesting game, because if I was to say, we have enough food to last for a week, which emotion might I be? Doubtful? Yeah, I'm not really sure. What if I said, we've got enough food to last for a week? Happy? Yeah, possibly confident. And it's very interesting as people get up and they move their arms and they change their voice and their facial expression, and people guess incorrectly, because it's fascinating. If they were trying to embody doubtfulness and somebody thought that they were just being timid, that might be a miscommunication. And that's a dangerous thing. When miscommunication happens, bad things happen. So it's very interesting, and it's a fun game to play. So moving on. Quotations. I'm going to try and support the claim the way we feel about software is important with some quotes. Now, quotes are often, I have a blog post about this called My Words and Their Words, or Their Words and My Words. Quotes are often misused and thrown out, often as an appeal to authority, which is one of the fallacies, logical fallacies. They say, well, just because Einstein said it, or Abe Lincoln, or some famous notable person, therefore it's so, let's move on, without giving any extra insight on why it might be so, without giving their personal perspective or how it relates to the topic that they're talking about. They just throw out quotes because it appeals to authority. Surely, if this famous notable person said it, it must be true. Now, that's a logical fallacy. But I would ask, sometimes the person saying the quote, it actually makes sense. They are an authority in this particular area. So it actually does make sense to think, to respect their opinion and take their words and think about them. Sometimes quotations can also be used as an appeal to emotion. I give you, somebody says a quotation from a famous person, and they're hoping it makes you feel a certain way. And that could be right or wrong. So I want you to consider each quote that I'm saying, if it makes sense, if the person that is delivering the quote if they're an authority in this area, and if the quote makes you feel a certain way, think, introspect, say, boy, this makes me feel a certain way. Is that reasonable? So here's the first quote. When dealing with people, remember you're not dealing with creatures of logic, but with creatures of emotion. This is from Dale Carnegie. He's an American writer. Now, I like this quote because oftentimes I like to think of myself, especially as a technologist, as a very logical type person. I like to think of myself as Data or Spock from Star Trek, and emotions don't get in the way of me making decisions. I use logic. I use critical thinking. That's how I come to make all my decisions. But it's not actually true. We are actually creatures of emotion. There's a podcast called Radiolab, if you've heard of it. If you haven't, radiolab.org is a way to see hear past episodes on a variety of diverse topics. One of them was about being overcome with emotions, and one of the people that they talked to was Antonio Damasio, and he is a neuroscientist that's done studies on people that have had head trauma or something that happened to their brain. And there was one particular study that he did, and he's replicated this with other people that have similar circumstances. This person had a head trauma. They were a normal person, and they had a head trauma, and they went to the doctor. They got better, except the trauma affected one part of their brain, the part of the brain that allows you to feel and express emotions, to intake emotions. So they could no longer feel emotions. Everything was just flat line. There was no happiness, no joy, no sadness. It was very flat. So other than that, they were the same person, except for one other notable thing. They had much, much difficulty making decisions, even simple decisions. For instance, if they were at work and somebody came over with a piece of paper and said, hey, I need you to sign this document. They'd look down at the desk at the paper and they'd say, oh, the document is black ink on white paper. Maybe I should use this blue pen because the blue pen would have my signature stand out more against the black ink. But the black pen is closer to me. I wouldn't have to reach all the way across the desk. I could grab the black pen. But the black pen has a cap on it, and I'd have to uncap it. And the blue pen doesn't have a cap, so it would be quicker. But the black pen has more ink, and the blue pen, and their analysis paralysis is something as simple as choosing a pen to sign a document. And this patient reported going to the supermarket, going to the grocery store, and trying to choose cereal from the cereal aisle was almost paralyzing because of all the vast choices. And what Antonio Damasio, the neuroscientist, found in all these similar cases, with anybody that had that inability to feel emotions through brain trauma or head trauma, had the same other effect. They made him very, very difficult to make decisions. And what he found is emotions, when all of the things are equal, you have choice A and choice B, and they're roughly similar, emotions come into play. Emotions give you that nudge in one direction and help you decide. So as much as I like to think that I'm Spock or Data, that would be a horrible place to be because it would be incredibly difficult to make emotions. It's just a sci-fi type thing. So I think it's important to remember that when you're dealing with people, they're creatures of emotions. Emotions affect decisions, not strictly creatures of logic. People are not always logical. And we create software. That's what we all do. Software is used directly or indirectly by people. So I think this is an important thing to remember. Next quote by Maya Angelou, the American poet. She says, I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. I find this to be very true in my own personal experience growing up. Sometimes I'll be recounting a story with friends, and I say, boy, do you remember 10, 15 years ago, we were on that road trip and we were going north up to that place. And I say, oh, I do remember that. We were going south, though. We weren't, it was a different place. And I said, oh, yeah, I forgot that detail. But I was in the front seat and you said something from the back. And I said, I think I was in the back. You were in the back and I was in the front. I said, oh, yeah, the details aren't that important. But I said, do you remember how hard we laughed? I don't think I've laughed that hard in my life. And they say, I do remember. I don't remember which direction or who was in the car, what I was wearing, all those details. I don't remember what was said exactly, but I remember laughing really hard. And I'm sure that if you thought about it, you probably have some similar stories like that. And Maya Angelou said, people forget what you said, what you did, all the details and circumstances, but they always remember the feelings. Now, this idea is a very old idea. Maya Angelou made it popular with this beautiful quote. And it's an old idea that many other notable business people and famous folks have used as the keystone to their success, their successful business. They say this idea, focusing on emotions, forgetting about not forgetting, but lowering the importance of the other details, has been central to their success. Folks like Richard Branson from Virgin Group, he said, customers shouldn't think of your business as a place to buy a product or use a service. It should be a fun place to be. And if you know much about Richard Branson and the Virgin Group companies, they're known as very fun places to be, and he tries to make fun products so that the consumers enjoy using his airline and all the different musics and all those things. And in interviews, he said that that quote by Maya Angelou and the idea behind it was absolutely central to him creating a successful business. Another person that said the same thing, Howard Schultz, he was the CEO of Starbucks. Starbucks has a role and a meaningful relationship with people that is not only about the coffee. Success is very shallow if it doesn't have emotional meaning. Now, he gave an interview a while back about the origin of Starbucks when he first started it, before Starbucks was around. He was visiting Italy, and here's the quote he was talking. I was out of my mind. I walked in, he was in Italy. I was out of my mind. I walked in to the shop, and I saw a symphony of activity and the romance in the theater of coffee. Coffee was at the center of conversation and the sense of community. That's what spoke to me. So he didn't want to bring coffee and a coffee shop back to the States. What he wanted to do was bring that sense of community. He wanted to bring back a feeling. It just so happened he used coffee as a means to do that. And I would wager to say that Starbucks is unarguably a successful company. And again, he said that that idea of focusing on emotions was central to the success. He wanted to create that sense of community, that sense of emotion. George Blankenship from Apple and Tesla, we're not selling you anything. We want you to feel differently. When you leave the store, emotionally engage the customers, don't transactionally engage them. Oftentimes when we're creating software, we think it's all about a series of transactions. A leads to B, if so, then, or if then, else, and it's all transactions. Software is all a bunch of transactions, whether it's in code, whether it's people interacting with it. But George Blankenship reminds us that even with software, no matter what your product or services is, you need to emotionally engage the customers. I think that's important. If you're creating software or any product or service, you have to remember to emotionally engage your customers. In my 25 years of building software at 15 different companies, this is often neglected or completely abandoned. It's put towards the bottom of the importance stack, or they don't do it at all. They don't focus on the customers. They focus on the functional requirements, performance requirements, the business requirements, the scalability, the archivability, the security, all these different things without ever thinking and considering about emotionally engaging the customers. And it's led to mixed results. Finally, Debbie Fields, she made Mrs. Fields cookies. I never felt like I was in the cookie business. I've always been in a feeling good, feeling business. My job's to sell joy and happiness experience. You get the idea. She's yet another founder that talked about the success of her business being central to focusing on emotion. So what do we get from all this? Hopefully you understand that successful businesses and people, by some ruler, by some measurement, recognize the importance of emotion. I think it's reasonable to say that these are successful people and businesses, and if they say that emotions are important to their success, maybe it's not such an appeal to authority. Maybe it actually makes sense to heed and listen to their words and consider them. All right, ready to go on? Purpose of software. So we all make software, and it serves some purpose. But what purpose exactly? What is the purpose of software? Well, it might be incorrect to say the purpose. That's kind of incorrect because if you're familiar with causality, cause and effect, this causes that. It's not a one-to-one relationship. It's not a one-to-many or many-to-one. It's always, always, always a many-to-many relationship. Always, whether you are aware or unaware of the causes, some are known, some are unknown, there's always many effects. Some you're known, some are unknown, but it's always a many-to-many relationship. So when thinking about this, there's no singular purpose that something exists. There's multiple purposes. So maybe it's more accurate to say purpose of software. The other thing that's curious is software. What the heck are you talking about, Damian? Software is a pretty big umbrella term, could refer to all sorts of different software. There's application software, system software, compiling software, all sorts of different types of software, and they all serve different purposes, surely. So what I was curious is there any singular purpose that applies to all categories of software? I wanted to find out if there was such a thing. So I started digging. Specifically, meaning if you consider some set of specific circumstances for some particular software product, here's the answer. It's infinite. There's infinite answers. Maybe your software, it could be reasonable to say, a purpose of my software is to help organize data. It's Excel, maybe Excel. A purpose of my software is to monitor heart rate. A purpose of my software is to land planes. A purpose of my software is to help planes take off. A purpose of my software is to schedule planes or to schedule pilots. Or a purpose of my software is to help the Mario save Princess Toadstool. A purpose of my software is to compile other software. So there's infinite answers if you take some very, very specific set of context and circumstances. Not very satisfying just saying there's infinite purposes for software existing. It's true, but not very satisfying. I was looking for a more general, unified reason. So I kept digging. Generally, here's some of the answers you find if you start to research this. Generally, it might be reasonable to say a purpose of all software is to organize information. That certainly applies to a larger set of software, but not all software. I don't think it'd be reasonable to say that, video games are organizing information. That's a weird way to describe a video game. And maybe a heart rate monitor, it's not really organizing information. So while organizing information is a more general purpose, and it applies to much more larger set of software. It doesn't apply to all. So what about this? To collect and process data. This, the first one was the old stated mission of Google, to process, to organize the world's information. To collect and process data is very similar. Once you organize the information, you process it. Similar is simplifying and automating workload. These, again, apply to larger sets of software, but not all software. It might be reasonable to say much software is simplifying and automating. Here's these people doing some manual process with their hands, these savages, can you believe it? Well, we're going to make their life simpler, and we're going to automate this process. So instead of using both hands, they use one finger to push a button, and it's automated. It's much simpler. It's faster. That, again, applies to a much larger set of software, but not all software. So I was still unsatisfied. And I kept searching and reading and talking to people around the world. This is what I do full time. I'm a public speaker, so I'm fortunate enough to travel around to tech conferences and speak to people and ask their opinion. Why do we make software? What's the purpose of software? And get a variety of opinions. And this is a frequent answer: to maximize shareholder profit. You know, your company's got to make money. That's why we do what we do. The CEO, Jack Welch of General Motors, said this is a byproduct. It's a result, but it's not a purpose of your product or service. As a byproduct, you should make money, but it's not the reason that the product is made. So while these are more general than the infinite specific purposes that I talked about earlier, they still don't apply to all software. So I kept searching, and you come up with some more interesting answers. Even more generally, if you Google and start reading and talking to people, one answer you quickly get is to be useful. All software should be useful. Imagine making a software product that's not useful. Not useful to anybody. Maybe it's useful to them, but not to you. Or maybe it's not useful at all. My joke is, well, if you find something that's completely contextless and worthless, then that's pretty valuable because you found something very interesting that serves as an example of a completely useless thing. So it has value there. But all software could be said, all software is useful. Even video games, it's useful because maybe they solve the problem of monotony or boredom or something like that. It's useful. Useful how? To help people. All software is used directly or indirectly by people. Even compiling software that's just compiling other software or software that monitors other software, it's directly or indirectly used by people. So I think it's reasonable to say all software is used by people. But to help people do what? This is the most common answer you'll find when you're asking people, what's the purpose of software? It's to solve a problem. Has anybody ever heard this at all? A purpose of your software, no matter what you make it, you're solving a problem, right? If there were no problem, then what's the point of it? If you're not simplifying workload, organizing data, helping solve monotony, or bringing joy, if you're not solving a problem, then what are you doing? All software solves a problem. This is the most common answer. I think it applies to all software. No matter what type of software it is, it's solving some problem. So this is a very generic answer that applies to a purpose of all software. I like this, but I wanted to dig deeper. I thought, well, I'm an armchair linguist. I'm somebody that studies linguistics and semantics. I'm interested in definitions and words. And I started scratching my head. I said, this is a fantastic answer. I can't think of exceptions to any piece of software that doesn't solve some sort of problem. Okay, that's great. But hey, Damian, what exactly is a problem? What's a solution? These softwares are supposed to be software solutions. What's a solution exactly? So I realized that they're things. Everything's a thing. A cat's a thing, and a table is a thing, and a door is a thing, and a chair is a thing, and you're a thing, and an idea is a thing. Everything's a thing. But things are not all the same things. The things that make a cat are different than the things that make a door a door. The things that make a door are different than the things that make a table, and a chair. Otherwise, everything would be the same. So there are essential characteristics of everything that make that thing and not every other thing in existence. Now, when you're talking about definitions, these are called the differentia, the thing that separates two species under the same genus. The differentia are the things that separate them. So I was curious, if a problem is a thing and a solution is a thing, what makes those things those things? What makes a problem a problem? What makes a solution and not a cat or a chair or something like that? What is it about a problem and solution that makes them those things? So what is a problem? What is a solution? This slide's online too, and this is being recorded if you want to look at these Calvin and Hobbes cartoons later. But I thought I'd start with an example to drive this home a little bit better. This is a reasonable dictionary definition of a square. A square is a figure with 4 equal straight sides, 4 right angles. So if I look around the room and I point at this and I say, that's a square, well, it doesn't have 4 equal straight sides. There's no 4 right angles. It's probably unreasonable to call this thing a chair, or a square. But that's a square. Because I can compare it against the essential characteristics in the definition. A figure with 4 equal straight sides, 1, 2, 3, 4, they're all equal in size, and 4 right angles, 1, 2, 3, 4. It fits all the essential characteristics, so it's reasonable to call that a square and not a chair or a cat. Well, what about this? Is that a square? It is. It's a little bit smaller, but there's nothing in the definition that talks about the size of a square. A square can be any different, large, small. That's not essential to being a square. What about that one? It's a square because there's nothing about color. Squares can be all sorts of different colors. They can be filled in. They can be an outline. Those are still reasonable to call those squares because they match the definition. That's a square. You could also label it as a diamond. It's just a square turned 45 degrees, so you can add an additional label to it, but it's also reasonable to call that thing a square because it does not violate any of the essential characteristics. It fulfills them all. That's not a square. 2 of the sides are equal, but the other 2 are not equal to the first 2. It still has 4 right angles, but it's not reasonable to call that a square. Not a square, not a square for similar reasons. Making sense? So the question is, what exactly is a problem? What's the definition of a problem and the essential characteristics? I see some smiles. I'm curious about that. So this is an interesting thing to look into because there's not a lot of research into the essential characteristics of something like problems and solutions. There's plenty and plenty of research about in the scientific method and scientifically how to formulate problems and how to experiment, hypothesize, evaluate solutions and experiment results, but there's not a lot about the essential characteristics of problems and solutions. So you have to dig and dig and dig to find anything that talks about this. So I looked up dictionaries, I looked up articles, I looked up multiple dictionaries. All dictionaries are not the same. And I looked, and some things bubbled to the top every single time. No matter where you looked, no matter who you talked to, no matter what article, you always found the same thing. There were nuances and differences, but these were the commonalities. A problem is an undesirable state that differs from some desirable state. Now imagine you're pointing at something in the room, and you say, boy, I think that thing is a problem. I want to label that as a problem. I do. And they say, Damian, is it undesirable to you? I go, no, it doesn't bother me. I'm okay with it. They go, well, if it's not undesirable, maybe it's not reasonable to call that a problem. Call it a cat or a chair, but it violates one of these essential characteristics. It's not undesirable. It's actually a desirable state to you. Now, how about you over there? What do you think about it? They say, I don't like it at all. So it is undesirable, and it differs from some desirable state. So it's reasonable for that person to call the same thing I'm pointing at a problem because it fulfills the essential characteristics. Does that make sense? So what about a solution? Flip it around. A solution is a desirable state that differs from some undesirable state. Sometimes when we're looking at problems, someone will suggest a solution or they'll implement a solution. And they say, here it is. We've solved this problem. And you ask the person, hey, you had a problem. It was an undesirable state. Here's the solution. It's fixed. And they say, I still don't like it. It's probably not reasonable to call that a solution because it's not a desirable state. It's still an undesirable state to that person. So it's still reasonable for them to point at that thing and say, I know you're calling it a solution. I appreciate that you tried to implement this thing, but I still don't like it. It's undesirable to me. Therefore, I feel comfortable labeling that as a problem or still a problem. Does that make sense? Now, we call problems in our industry bugs or errors or defects or glitches. There's all sorts of different words, and there's nuanced definitions. One I like for bug is anything that bugs someone. I love that. It's very short and pithy, and it drives home the point. If it doesn't bug someone, then it's not a problem. It's not a bug. My joke is if you encounter a bug while you're testing or in your software application, what's the quickest way to resolve that bug? And people are like, well, you enter the defect tracking system and then put it a high priority. And other people, that's ridiculous. In our shop, we just walk down the hall and talk to the developer, and they fix it immediately. Here's an even faster way. Tell someone that doesn't care. To that person, they point at that thing and they go, oh, you call this a problem, you call it a bug, it doesn't bug me. It's not a bug to me. It's just information. It's just something. I don't really care about it. It's not a problem. So that's my little joke about if you want to solve all your defects quickly, go introduce them to somebody that doesn't care. They're not problems anymore. Poof, you've solved your entire defect backlog. So emotions are an essential characteristic of problems and solutions. You can't have a problem or a solution without evoking some desire or undesire. Those are emotions. So let's go back here. More generally, a purpose for making all software is to be useful to help people to solve problems. And of course, problems have emotions built into them as essential characteristics to affect emotion. So all software affects emotion, unless I'm a tester. I like to test things. I like to test my kids and my wife and my ideas. And this is an idea. I came to this reasonable, logical conclusion that all software helps people solve problems and that affects their emotions. If it's reasonable software solution, then it must be desirable to them, so that's affecting their emotion. Unless, is there any way that I can break this idea? And there's one circumstance I discovered where this doesn't matter. If you have a monopoly and the thing is a necessity. So let's imagine that I have a company and I produce a piece of software, and this piece of software allows you to do something. There's some purpose, some goal, something you're trying to achieve. And the only way that you can achieve this goal is with my software. You can't achieve this without my software. My software is the only way. And you can't buy it anywhere else. I'm the only person in the entire world that makes it. All of a sudden, I don't really care about your emotions. If you're trying to achieve that goal, you say, Damian, I really need your software, but it's riddled with bugs, it's low quality, it displeases me, it's not desirable, but I really need it to solve this. I say, well, I don't really care how you feel. You're going to buy it from me, or else you're not going to, how important it is to achieve that goal. But if either of these things is not true, then emotions come back into play. What if it's necessary for them to achieve the goal, but you can buy it from 5 different vendors? And we're all similar, except for mine doesn't make the person feel like they want to feel. It bothers them. It bugs them. It's still problematic. It still affects undesired emotions in them. Then they'll probably buy from my competitor that makes them feel the way that they want to feel. Or what if I'm the only place that you can buy it, but it's not necessarily necessary to achieve this particular goal? In other words, you can achieve this goal in other ways. You don't need my product. It's nice to have. You might want it, but you don't need it. Then all of a sudden, your emotions come into play again. So if either of these is, if both of these are true, then all of a sudden emotions don't matter. But if either of these is false, then emotions are very, very important to software acceptance. A purpose of software is to affect emotion. If we call them software solutions, and emotions are part of problems and solutions, all software, no matter what type it is, affects emotions. All right. Oh, here's another one of these exercises that we're skipping. In this one, I just ask folks to think about their product, their software product. And it's a big, vast product, or it's a small product, or it's some kind of product. And I asked them to think more granularly about some feature, some function, or a few of those things, and write down the purpose. What's the purpose of that feature or function? What problem does that feature or function solve? If it doesn't solve anything, then what's it even exist for? All software, even the features and functions within software, should solve some problem. So I have people spend 10 to 15 minutes thinking about writing down some feature or function in their particular application, the software that they help develop in whatever way they do, and they write down a purpose for it. And it sometimes takes some time. People have never thought about their features and functions in this particular way in terms of problems and solutions at that level. And then we talk about them and people share them and we discuss them. So that's how that exercise goes. And you can do these on your own if you're interested later. Okay, so research. Earlier I quoted famous notable folks. Now I'm going to quote some folks that are researchers. They have studied this topic far longer and deeper than I have. And they've come to some surprising conclusions that I thought were very interesting and relevant to this particular talk. Unfortunately, there are few studies in the literature that specifically address the relationship between emotions and software. This is from Modeling Emotional Requirements in 2014, and it's sadly true. When I was doing the research for this talk, there's not a lot out there. There's not a lot of research and focus on the relationship between emotion and software, which stinks in my opinion, because I'm trying to show and prove the claim that the way we feel about software is important, and there's barely anybody that's focusing on it. There's barely any papers on it. This is a partial list of some of the papers I found going all the way back to 1989. Some of the titles don't look like they have anything to do with emotions and software, but I assure you they do. And all the way to 2014, the Modeling Emotional Requirements. And many of these later papers refer back to things that they found in earlier papers. So I'll read you a few quotations from these different papers, again, trying to support the claim that the way we feel about software is important. This comes from a 2005 paper, Is Emotion Relevant to Requirements Engineering? They say, we argue that emotions are just as important and valid as factors affecting requirements as are any other traditional factor. They say any other traditional factor, such as function, performance, cost, user interface, all these other things are important. And this emotional requirements, emotional considerations are just as important. And this is a long white paper. They did studies and research and tests and polls. And this is one of the conclusions that they came to in their paper. They say it's just as important. Now, again, in my experience, I said it was often put to the bottom of the important stack or completely neglected. So these companies definitely did not see emotional requirements as being just as important as all these other things. I wish they'd read this paper. 1 year later, 2006, emotional requirements in video games. One interesting thing to note is many of the papers that I did find that focused on the relationship between emotions and requirements came from two industries. Number one was video games, because video games, our purpose is to help people solve problems. Video games' primary problem that they're solving is boredom. I mean, they're bringing joy. That's why you play video games. Maybe you do it for hand-eye coordination. I guess there's other reasons as well. But the primary reason that video game software exists is to affect emotion. And so much of the research is very important in that industry to make sure that if the entire purpose of their software, a large purpose of their software is to affect emotion, they better make sure that they're considering emotion. So there's a lot of studies done in the video game industry. Another industry is healthcare. Doctors are trying to make their patients feel better. They're trying to cure them, to heal them, to make them feel a certain way. And they used to do it with pens and papers and tools, and they still use many of those things, but now they have software, and they don't want the software to get in the way of what they're ultimately trying to do, which is help people. So the software industry also tries to make sure that the software makes doctors and patients, if they use it directly, feel a certain way. So those two industries is where a lot of this research came from. So anyway, in 2006, these folks came to the conclusion the induced emotional state is the most important deliverable requirement. Any functionality that exists only to further that emotional goal. That's important. Any functionality that exists only to further that goal. They say that player acceptance and market success is driven by the realization of this set of non-functional emotional requirements. So unlike the previous paper that said our conclusion is that it's just as important as everything else, these folks said it's not just as important, it is the most important thing. If you focus on the emotions as the most central set of requirements and have all the other requirements support those, that's how you will determine market success. So this is modeling emotional requirements. What do you do about that? If you agree with this is true, what do you do? Back to the 2014 paper, they say one way to produce better systems, better applications, is to explore the user's emotions, to uncover those hidden requirements that may otherwise be ignored. I like this for a couple different reasons. Number one is I had already named this presentation, the hidden requirements, before I came across this quote. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Somebody else thought of these emotional requirements as being hidden in the same way. They used the same phrase, so I thought that was kind of cool. But I also thought it's important because this particular paper offers suggestions on what to do, how to uncover those users' emotions. One way is to produce systems is to uncover those hidden requirements. At the second half of this talk, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks and suggestions. If you agree that the way we feel about software is important and you want to go back to your particular place of employment, your shop, and say, hey, we should probably start focusing on emotional requirements, I'm going to tell you how to do that. And some of those come from this paper. So before I get to that, I'll give you a case study. This comes from a mouthful of a paper called Adopting Information Technology, the First Step in Design, Lessons Learned from Working with Brazilian Social Volunteers in 2003. Okay, so it's a long paper, and they did a case study, and here's how it went. There's a group of Brazilian social workers, you see, and they do social work, and part of doing their work, they have to interface with software. They use software, and they hate it. It doesn't make them feel the way they want to feel. They use it, but it's a problem. It bugs them. And it bothers them. So the Brazilian government said, well, this is a problem. Our social workers are extremely unhappy with this software. They hired another company and said, we want you to rewrite, replace, make new software for these social workers. The first thing that this company did was they recognized the importance of emotions in software. So they used methods, and I'm going to talk about the specific method later, from the world of sociology and anthropology, and they looked at these different areas of how to evaluate the needs and the wants and the motivations of these Brazilian social workers. And they went and they interviewed them and they talked to them and they said, you do this social work, do you do it for money? And they said, we don't. Some of us don't get paid or we get paid very little. We don't do this for money. Oh, for status. So you can walk around and tell people, I'm a social worker. They say, no, we're looked down on. It's not. We don't do this for status. Well, why do you do this? We do it for satisfaction. We do it because it makes us feel a certain way. And the software that they were using wasn't making them feel that way. It was annoying them, bothering them. So this new group of developers said, well, if we want to continue making them feel satisfied in the work that they do, we better make sure that that is the central piece to this new piece of software. And all the functional requirements that we come up with about how it should function and perform, and all the scalability and archivability and security requirements, all of them should track back to, does it satisfy the user? Does it make them feel the way that they want to feel? Because that's the entire reason they do this job, not for money or status. The epilogue to the story was they did exactly that, and the workers loved it. It was a very successful project because this development team focused on emotions first and foremost and had everything else supporting that. So finally, back to modeling emotional requirements in 2014. This is a rich, wonderful paper. The way people feel about a technology can determine whether the technology is embraced or rejected by its intended users. I think that seems pretty important. This is a 2014 paper that built on many of the other research and papers that came before it, and their conclusion was the emotions can help determine whether it's embraced or rejected. So all of this leads to research by people that have studied this longer and deeper than I have, that suggests that emotional requirements can influence software acceptance and should be considered. So if you do go back to your company, you say, I was at Build Stuff and I attended this talk and this guy made a claim about the way we feel about software is important. And there was some papers in there and people seem to suggest that market acceptance of our software could be determined by the emotional state, the emotional requirements. Maybe it's something we should start pushing up in our priority stack or looking at initially if you don't look at it at all. Maybe it's something we should start consider doing. Finally, requirements. This is the last part of supporting it. I'm going to look at requirements in a much different way than perhaps you have. So all these Calvin and Hobbes cartoons, I didn't just pick them at random because they're cute. I happen to like Calvin and Hobbes. But are you familiar with the Calvin and Hobbes cartoon strip? Some of you? Some? Okay, no, some yeses. Okay, so it's a strip from the U.S. Bill Watterson writes it. I chose these specifically. Each Calvin and Hobbes cartoon I chose specifically because it relates to the section or the idea that I'm talking about. And in this particular one, he says, I don't want to do my homework. I want to have fun. And he leaves. He goes outside. Too much stress, unhealthy. I don't see why I had to come in. And the second one, he has this funny booth, swift kick in the butt. How's business? Terrible. It's hard to believe. I can't understand it. Everybody I know needs what I'm selling. So I hope in a moment you'll find out why I chose these two to represent requirements. So what exactly is a requirement? First, a software requirement, dictionary definition, a particular thing or goal that a system should be or do, and we make those explicit. We write them down in different ways, and these are just a couple. There's many, many different ways that we write down requirements. These things that people ask for, these requests, these requirements. Sometimes, depending on how you develop software, whether it's waterfall or agile or iterative or whatever methodology and approach your shop uses, however your BAs do it, maybe they write them different ways. But roughly, this is what software requirement looks like. But I want to focus even more generally, the same way I was looking at software in a general sense. So what about a requirement generally? Well, the etymology, the history of this word comes from an old French word, requere, which meant to ask, to petition, to beg, to seek, to request something. And the suffix ment meant the result or the product of something. So in essence, the original meaning of requirement was the result or product of something that was asked for. Now, a more modern definition of requirement, if you look it up in the dictionary, is this. It's something that's wanted or something that's needed. Pretty simple. But remember, I'm an armchair linguist. I like to look up definitions. So these are things I like to find out. What exactly are these things? What makes a want different than a need and a need different than a cat? So I'm interested in the essential characteristics. A want is something that's desired, and a need is something that is necessary for some purpose to achieve some goal. So I've taken the first definition, and I've taken two of the important words from the first definition, and I've defined those, giving me more information about what we're talking about here. Now, some of you in the room, how many developers do we have? People that's your primary hat. Okay, not all hands. If you're not a developer, maybe you're a business analyst or a team lead or a scrum master or a tester, or you do something else. For the developers, you might think, listen, I've been a developer my entire career. I consume requirements. I don't create them. Somebody else writes them and they give them to me and I consume them and I turn bits and bytes into pixels on a screen and I turn these ideas that are floating around in the air in some user's mind and now they're written on paper as a requirement, and I take them, turn them into bits and bytes, and then the testers, they consume the requirements, and they say, does the thing that we made equal the thing that we wanted? And they compare and see if it supports or disproves this hypothesis. That's basically the software development lifecycle, kind of, sort of. And they say, I'm a developer. I don't make requirements. Maybe you don't make software requirements, but I think everybody has been making requirements their entire life, especially if you think about them as wants or needs. If I go to order a burger and I really like bacon, I might say, I want bacon. So I ask for the burger, can you please add bacon? That's a requirement because it's a want. It's something that's wanted. It's desired by me. I like bacon, so I want it on my burger. And maybe I have an allergy to dairy, and if I eat dairy, I'm going to get hives. I'm going to break out and have an allergic reaction. In order to avoid that allergic reaction, I don't want any dairy. So the only way to achieve this goal of not breaking out is to have no dairy. It's necessary. So it's a need, and I say, please, no cheese on the burger, no butter on the burger, nothing like that. That's another requirement because it's something that's needed for some purpose to avoid an allergic reaction. That's one example of me creating two requirements, something that's wanted and something that's needed. Please add bacon and no cheese, two requirements. All of us have been creating requirements our entire life. So in this sense, in a more general sense, outside of the context of software, we're all requirement creators. And I think that's interesting as we go back to the software context to think about this. So requirements are something that's wanted or needed. Has anyone ever seen this poster? Okay. This is a very famous poster, especially in the U.S. It's Uncle Sam, who represents the nation, the country of America, and he says, I want you. So here's the history of this particular poster. It was created in 1917 by an artist named James Flagg. A little fun trivia. This is what James Flagg, the artist, looked like. He had a mirror, and he styled Uncle Sam in his own likeness. So this is actually, Uncle Sam looks like an actual real person that once existed. So the artist created this, and it was originally for the cover of a magazine called Leslie's Weekly, and it wasn't until much later that it started to be used for recruitment purposes for the U.S. military. Anyway, a very famous poster. What most people don't know, this was in 1917. This poster was created in 1914. This is Lord Kitchener, and this was created by an artist named Alfred Leet. Now, Alfred Leet created this poster, and 3 years later, James Flagg was commissioned by Leslie's Weekly magazine to draw a cover for our magazine. He said, all right, and he looked at this Lord Kitchener poster over here, and he thought, that's pretty cool, and he copied it. Now, of course, he used artistic license, and he made some differences. He changed the colors, he changed the hat, he changed the facial hair, he made it look like himself. He changed several different things about it, but one of the most interesting things that he changed is the word. One says, your country needs you, the original. James Flagg made it say, I, representing country, your country wants you. Now, that's fascinating. Not only did he change the way it looks, but he changed the word. So I'll ask the audience, when you look at these two posters, do they make you feel different in any way? And if so, how? No wrong answers. Left one feels more emotional because want is kind of a desire, so it affects emotions in you. And this one feels a little colder, perhaps. Less emotional.
That looks like Stalin.
Okay. Yeah, there's a reason. Yeah, you want it? Anybody looks like Stalin. Hi. Anybody else? Does these different posters affect you, evoke different emotions, just when you look at them or consider the words?
Right guy, well, if I go to him, I will do him a favor.
Oh, okay.
The left guy is, for some reason, he thinks that I'm obligated to do this.
Ooh, an obligation. That's a great word. Okay, so if you feel obligated over here and over here, it's more of a favor. I'm doing you a favor.
And do a favor for you, but this guy tells us that I owe something.
Okay, that's fantastic. I like that perspective. Anybody else? Do these posters make you feel a different way? Okay. Yeah, absolutely. That can make you feel differently. So when I go around and I give this presentation and I ask people these questions, it's very, very often, frequent, all the time really, that people say these posters make them feel differently. Sometimes it's the stylized versions of the characters, but often it's the words want and need that make them feel differently. One makes you feel more emotional and the other a little less emotional. Or one's a favor and one's an obligation. There was an article written studying these two and critiquing them, and the author said, those four words, your country needs you, proved to be very effective. This was also used for recruitment purposes. It evoked patriotism and guilt in those yet to enlist in the Army without straying so far as to be emotional blackmail. So it's very interesting that this poster was analyzed that way. Boy, this really makes me feel a little bit guilty. I feel like I need to join the Army. I mean, Lord Kitchener needs me? It's very interesting that was one of the analysis of this. So the words, besides the way the paintings appear, the words want and need can make you feel differently. Does it make you feel differently if your significant other or family member says, I want you versus I need you? Do those make you feel differently? Do they mean the same thing, perhaps? What do you
I want you to do something, and just I want you.
Yeah. So it's interesting to think about these, whether you answer aloud or not. Next time you're talking to a loved one or something like that, and they respond to you, or you say back to them, I want you, I need you, it could evoke different feelings. The words themselves can make us feel differently. So let's go a little deeper into this idea that requirements are wants and needs, because I think it's pretty important. So a requirement's a thing that's wanted or needed. wanted or needed. So how do you know? Somebody says, Damian, here's a list of requirements. And I say, okay, great. It's these things that somebody somewhere wants or needs. How do I know which is which? Here's a little method that might help you determine whether a given requirement is something that's wanted or something that's needed. First thing you do is identify the requirement. Let's call it X. Next is you establish the purpose, let's call that Y, for X. So they say, here's the requirement. And I say, okay, what's the purpose? What's the reason? What does this do? And they say, well, we're trying to achieve this thing. We're trying to achieve this. That's why. I go, oh, okay. Now, these two right here might look familiar. Have you ever heard of the 5 whys? The 5 whys is a horrible name for an approach to doing root cause analysis, which is another horrible name. There's no singular, remember, cause and effect. There's no singular root. Otherwise, all root cause analysis field would have Big Bang or creation or whatever. We all go back to that. So there's no singular root cause. There's always many causes and many effects. So if you think about a purpose for this particular thing, if you can achieve it, and you ask why, that's the first step. You identify the requirement X and you find out the purpose, and then you do it again and you ask why. Purpose is a why question. So you keep doing it, and you get deeper and deeper and deeper. That's essentially the 5 whys technique. But in order to find out if this requirement is a want or a need, I'm going to add a third step. Ask, can Y be achieved without X? Can I get to Y even if I don't have X? If the answer is yes, then X is a want. In other words, hey, you're trying to achieve purpose Y over here. That's what you're trying to achieve. Can you get to there any other way besides X? And I say, yes, I can. I can use something else. I can use Z and I can still get to Y. They say, oh, then X is just a want. You want to have it, but it's not necessary to achieve this goal. But if the answer is no, the only way I can get to Y, the only way I can achieve this thing is through X, then I need it. It's necessary. So that's one way that you can find out. If somebody hands you a requirement, you can use this little formula to help you determine whether it's something that the user wants or whether it's necessary to achieve some purpose, if it's something they need. Now, I'll give you a little example to try and drive this home a little more and show you something interesting that happens if you go deep enough. Here's a requirement, a non-technical requirement, but I require a library card. Somebody comes to me with this. So my little story, I require a library card, Damian. I say, okay, what is the requirement? It's a library card. That's what you require. What's the purpose for a library card? In this particular story, established a purpose. It's to check out books in the library. If I want to go to the library, I could steal them and put them in my coat, or I could read them in the library, but that's not checking out books. Checking out books requires a library card or an identifier, an account or something. So ask, can I check out books from the library without a library card? No. I can't. Therefore, the library card is needed in order to achieve that goal. So I've taken a requirement, I've used this little formula, and determined that this particular requirement is a need because it's necessary to achieve this goal. Does that make sense and logically follow? Now, here's something that interesting happens if you keep going further and further. Let's take that same requirement, library card. What's the purpose? To check out books. And we've already determined that you can't check out books without a library card. Therefore, library card is blue. It's a need. It's necessary. So let's do the 5 whys technique and say our new requirement, we require to check out books. I say, why do you want to check out books? What's the purpose? Well, in this story, it's to gain knowledge. I want to gain some knowledge. Say, okay, can you gain knowledge without checking out books in the library? Of course, you can read on the internet, you can talk to a teacher or somebody. There's a million ways to gain knowledge without checking out books. So maybe you just want to check out books. Therefore, to check out books is a red want. Let's do it again. A new requirement. I require to gain knowledge. Okay, why do you want to gain knowledge? Well, I'd like to learn how to cook. It's something that's why I require to learn. I'm trying to learn how to cook. Okay, can you learn how to cook without gaining knowledge? Learning implies gaining knowledge. So I would say that any learning is gaining information, is gaining knowledge. So you can't learn something without gaining knowledge. Therefore, in order to achieve the goal of learning to cook, you need to gain knowledge, whether it's from an advisor, a teacher, the internet, a book. You're gaining knowledge, and that's learning. So in order to do that, therefore, to gain knowledge requirement is necessary to achieve this goal. Let's do it again. My new requirement is to learn to cook. Why do you want to learn to cook? I want to impress someone. This is my story. Okay. So I want to impress someone. Okay, Damian, that's your requirement. Your purpose is to impress them. Is there any other way that you can achieve this goal, impressing them? And I go, yeah, I guess I could do a cool dance, or I could compliment them or something. They say, oh, okay. So that's not necessary. Therefore, learning to cook is just something you want to do because you think it might help you impress them. All right, let's do it again. To impress someone, I require to impress someone. Why, Damian? Because I want to date this person. They say, okay, is there any other way that you could date them, without impressing them? Sure, maybe they think I'm sweet or kind or something like that. It's not about impressing them. So maybe it's just something I want. It's not necessary to achieve that goal. So again, to impressing someone, that's a want. I've identified this requirement as a want using that little formula. Let's do it again. I want to date them. What's the purpose for dating them? Well, it's going to make me feel happy. I would feel very happy if I dated this person. They say, wonderful. Can you achieve happiness in any other way besides dating this person? I say, yeah, I could eat chocolate or take a nice hot shower or watch a funny movie. Those are other ways that make me feel happy. So therefore, I've realized that through my formula, the requirement to date them is something that's just wanted because there's other ways to achieve the goal of happiness. Let's do it again. My requirement is to feel happy. What's the purpose of feeling happy? Yeah. It's a difficult or impossible question. And what's fascinating is no matter what requirement you start with, software requirement, library card, no bacon on my cheeseburger, add bacon, whatever your requirement starts with, if you dig down far enough, you'll almost always end at one of two places. One is a philosophical, unanswerable concept because it's good, because it's moral, because it's right or ethical or something like that, which is debated for thousands of years. Well, what's good, what's right, what's moral? Or you end at an emotion because it makes you feel a certain way. So it's amazing that no matter what you start with at the top, if you dig down far enough, you're going to probably end at some emotion. That is pretty fascinating, especially when you think requirements are just wants and needs, and they can often affect, just like the two posters made you feel different ways, perhaps, and they often originate from emotions. So from the bottom up, you start with an emotion and it rolls up into some high-level requirement. The product shall do this. The product should perform this way. I need a library, require a library card. If you dig down, all of those things probably originated with some emotion. That's fascinating. So, here's one of those exercises. I have people now, they've identified a function of their software, some feature function. They've identified the purpose. And now what I ask is, try and determine if it's a want or a need. They have a requirement written there, the purpose and the requirement that they've identified. They can use this formula to figure out if those requirements they've written down are wants or needs. And we, again, walk through those and make observations and talk about them. So at this point, hopefully, I have sufficiently supported the idea that the way we feel about software is important. I've done it through quotations. I've done it by talking about the purpose of software. I've done it with research, and I've done it with digging deep into requirements that are simply wants or needs and originate from emotions. So, all right, we've got a half hour left to go through some ways. Now, perhaps I hope that you're on board and you say, all right, Damian, when I came in, I already thought this was a good idea, so I didn't need all this convincing. That's great. Some of you might have been skeptical, but hopefully now you're less skeptical. Some of you might thought this was ridiculous and not true, and hopefully I've changed your mind. Hopefully at this point of the talk, you're on board. You say, all right, I do agree that the way we feel, that customers feel about software is indeed important and therefore should be considered, at least pushed higher in the priority stack at our company than it currently is. So what do we do about it? Let's talk about emotional requirements. These are the tips and tricks and suggestions that I'm going to offer. It's not a deep dive. This is not the workshop, but I'm going to give you some pointers that perhaps you can jot down or write down or remember and go and research and do these on your own if you're serious about taking this idea back to your place of work. All right, just like there's not much focus I talked about earlier between the connection between emotions and software, there's not a whole lot of literature and research about emotional requirements. Software engineering itself is very, very young compared to mechanical or electrical or civil engineering. Those are very, very old fields. Software engineering is about 60, 70 years old, maybe. And then user interface, user experience, those are two subsets of making software that are definitely more about focusing on the users and their feelings, their emotions. But those are even younger. The first person to ever have the title user experience, Donald Norman, that was in the early 90s. He had user experience architect. He was the first person to have UX in their title. So even within the 60 or so years that software engineering has been around, the focus on customers, especially with user experience, is even younger than that. So there's not much focus on this stuff, which is, again, is a shame, I think, because I think that emotions are so important. So let's talk about emotional requirements. We've already said that a software requirement is a particular thing or a goal that the system should be or do. So what's an emotional requirement look like? It's very, very similar. An emotional requirement is a particular feeling, an emotion, that a system should induce in a particular user. Not much different, but if you write down your requirements in whatever format at your company. Maybe they look like this. System should be or do something, or as a role, I want goals so you get some benefit. if you start writing down and making explicit your emotional requirements, they might look like this. The system should induce some feeling in a particular role. Or as a particular role, I want some goal so that instead of this benefit, it's a specific feeling. So if you decide to go back to your company and say, all right, we should probably move the emotional considerations. I'm convinced that they're important. We should move them up in our priority stack. And they say, well, how do we do it? You say, well, I have some suggestions on how we can start making those explicit and tell the BAs they can start writing them down in this way. And I'll go deeper, obviously. So here's some things you want to consider. The feeling, it's right there. Should induce some feeling, so that feeling. So the first thing to ask is, what emotion are you trying to induce? Each feature, each function should probably induce some emotion in your users. If it's solving a problem, and each feature and each function, if it's not solving a problem, what's it doing in your product? It must solve some problem, and problems and solutions are based on emotions. They affect emotions, so a solution must have someone in a desirable state. So what emotion are you trying to induce in the person? This is a list of the 8 basic emotions. This is from Robert Plutchik, American psychologist, and he started with this 8 base emotions. Now, if this is all the emotion, the way that you can express emotions, you'll probably have difficulty in your life. Wittgenstein said, let me get this quote right. Yeah, Ludwig Wittgenstein said, the limits of my language means the limits of my world. There's some fascinating stuff out there. Again, some of this is on Radiolab, the podcast I mentioned, about very, very rare cases of people that lack language, and how they interact with the world. Imagine that you can look at a chair and you can sit in a chair and you can touch a chair, but the word chair doesn't exist because you don't have words. So therefore it makes it difficult. Everything in your mind is made up of words. You can't even conceptualize this thing. It's a fascinating stuff if you lack words. So that's one extreme example. There's very rare cases where a feral child was discovered in the woods and they lack language completely, and it's fascinating. On the other end, consider if you have a weak vocabulary. If you only are able to express 8 emotions, you're not going to be able to express yourself very well. So in more recent times, I don't expect you to read this, but you can Google it and look it up. It's called the emotion wheel, and there's various formats of this thing. So it starts in the middle with some of those basic emotions, and as you go further out in the wheel, it gets to more nuanced emotions. So I would encourage you to increase your vocabulary, because the limits of your language is the limits of your world. The more language that you have, the larger your world will be, the better you'll be able to conceptualize and explain and communicate with others. So if you can have a larger emotional vocabulary, you'll be able to better decide which emotion you want to induce, instead of just saying, when the user pushes this button, they feel joy. And when they do this, they feel joy. And when they do this and they click this, they feel joy. That's not very helpful. But if you're able to start saying, maybe they feel confident, maybe they feel respected. When they get to this screen, they feel a sense of accomplishment. Those are more nuanced emotions that can help you better focus all of your other requirements. The next thing you should consider is the target. In whom do you want to induce this emotion? What makes abstract constructs like emotions are subjective by nature. So something that, there's other things like fear and humor and courage. Something that is scary to you might not be scary to me. Same thing, but it's scary to you, not scary to me. Something that was funny to me as a child might not be funny to me as an adult. So time. I'm the same person, same joke, but I no longer find it funny. So these types of abstract constructs are very important to think about who and when. And it's the same thing for emotions. Same thing, by the way, for quality and bugs. What's high quality product for one person might be considered low product to another. What's a bug for one, you tell someone that doesn't care, it's not a bug for them. That's the nature of abstract constructs. So in whom do you want to induce this emotion? If you say, when the user gets to the screen, they should feel a sense of accomplishment and satisfaction. In whom? Maybe in this particular target user, but in this user over here, what we know about them is they won't feel a sense of satisfaction. So you have to think about, when you're writing these requirements, in whom do you want to induce the emotion? Who are your users? Think about that, their demographics. Context, what's the set of circumstances? All the other details that might affect how people feel about your software. The cultural, social norms, life experiences, the environment, all of these things can affect how someone feels about your software. Imagine that someone's using your software right after they won the lottery. They might, even if your software is not very good, they might report that they feel good about it. Or what if someone's using their software after their house burned down? Even if normally they'd feel very happy about your software, a sense of joy or accomplishment, maybe that day they're not. So the context has changed. It's important to consider those things. Getting emotional requirements. All right. Again, we've all created requirements our entire lives, but this is mostly speaking to business analysts at your shop, and this is something, if you're not a BA yourself, you can take these ideas back to them. So you say, all right, I'm convinced that the way we feel about software is important. We should start doing it. I know how to write them down now, and I know what they look like, and I have a rich vocabulary. So how the heck do I get these? This is, again, pointers for you I'm planting seeds here for you to go out and research. Here's the first one: interviews and discussions. If you're so fortunate, you can go and talk to your users, interview them, discuss things with them. Say, hey, you have this manual process, and you do it. How does it make you feel? How does it make you feel? And you write that down. It makes me feel frustrated. Oh, that's interesting. When you do this, it makes you feel frustrated. Where if we're going to create a solution for you, our solution better not induce the same feeling. If you still feel frustrated, that's not going to be a good software solution. Those Brazilian social workers prove that. So you can talk to them, discuss things with them. And again, timing matters. If you're talking to them right after their house burnt down, maybe it's not a good time. So all these things to consider, but this is the number one way, face-to-face, but that's not always possible. We don't always have access to our users. We're far removed. So as I go down the list, these become less and less effective, but hopefully they're better than nothing rather than doing nothing. Next is surveys, polls, and questionnaires. So if you can't talk to them, maybe you can send them an email or a survey or some type of poll or write up a questionnaire for them to answer. I can't talk to you, I can't discuss things, but this, at least I'll be able to get some information. Now, when you're dealing with surveys and polls and questionnaires, this is part science, part art. Questions, obviously, you've heard of open and closed-ended questions, but those are big categories that have all sorts of categories. Within closed, those are things like, did, can, is, was, things that can be answered with a single word. Open is what, where, when, why, who. There's probing questions, there's reflective, there's follow-up questions. There's all sorts of different questions that you can ask. Polls and surveys, there's a science and an art to creating these. There's a Likert scale. Have you ever seen one where it says, do you strongly agree, kind of agree, you're neutral, strongly disagree? That's called a Likert scale. And that was specifically designed to allow people to use their emotional response when answering. So you can lean on that. There's ranking versus rating. Rank these things from first to last. Or rate these things on a scale of 1 to 10. How do you feel? So there's all these different ways that you can ask users about their emotions and their emotional requirements through surveys, polls, and questionnaires. It's not as good as sitting down and having face-to-face conversations, but it's still better than nothing. Observation. Maybe you can't talk to them or send them emails, but maybe somehow you're able to observe them doing their work. Now, when you do this, there's something called the Hawthorne effect, which is observancy effect. People can sometimes act differently when they know that they're being watched. Like, why are you watching me do my work? What is this for? So you can allay their fears by talking to them and saying, listen, the reason I want to watch you work is I'm trying to gather information about how you do your job so that if we're building a solution for you, we can build the best possible solution. It's not going to go back to your boss. We're not using it for bad purposes. This is how and why we're going to do this. That may make them feel a little better. I say, I want you to act natural. Do your normal job. And maybe they'll act a little bit more naturally, and you can reduce the effects of the Hawthorne effect. So when you're observing them and they're doing their process, maybe they're using version 1 of your software, they're still doing this process manually, watch them and watch their body language. Maybe at some point they go, you might want to note that down. Their brow is furrowed and their arms are crossed. Or maybe at some point they're smiling, or whatever. You note those things down, because whatever you make your solution for them, you want to make sure that at this point in the process, they're no longer scowling and crossing their arms. At this point in the process, they're still happy. So those are the types of things that you can note by observing someone do their job. Next is personas. Sometimes you have zero access to users, so you create fake users. Is everyone here familiar with personas, which are essentially made-up users? You are? Okay. So personas are a way of creating a fake user. It's full of information like their demographics, their age, their wants, their needs. And sometimes you have historical data. Maybe from a prior version of your product, you have a bunch of user data that says, we know most of our users live in this area of the country, they make this much money, their marriage status is this, and we have all this information. So you can, since you can't talk to them, you can't send them a survey, what you can do is write up a persona that imagines this person and say, all right, if this person was going to use our product, this is how they might reply to what their wants and needs are. This is how their emotional requirements might look. Again, it's not ideal, because you're basically pretending, but it's still better than nothing. You're at least considering the possible emotional response and feelings of your potential users. So personas are still a decent way. Others, ethnography, UDUM, these come from the world of sociology. So this is how sociologists go and study the worlds. They study different cultures to find out their hopes and dreams and motivations. Ethnography is the broad term for that. UDUM stands for Unified Discourse Unveiling Method. This is the specific method that was used by the developers in that Brazilian social worker study. Do you remember that? So when they went and the government said, hey, developers, we want you to create a new software product for these social workers, they used the specific UDUM, which is an entire process created that allows them to go and observe the workers and sit with the workers, and it gives them questions to ask the workers. And they're taking notes about all their observations and all the things that the workers said. We do this because we want to feel satisfied, not for money. And they take all of this information using the UDUM method, and they analyzed it, and that was, again, the primary keystone to their entire project. Everything had to support the findings from the UDUM method. Finally, this is not a method to get emotional requirements, but it's the usability matrix of emotions. This is a way to track them. Let me see how much time we have. Okay, it's a way to track them. So imagine you have an Excel spreadsheet, and down the left-hand side are all of the features and functions, the things that your product is or does. And along the top is your now rich vocabulary of all the different emotions. And so you say, for this feature, we want them to feel this way and this way. And for this one, they reported that they want to feel this way. This way, we observed that they were unhappy, so we want to make them very happy. That's a way to start tracking these things, and you can use this at the other end of the process when you're testing to see if you actually did it. All right, so next is for the developers, inducing emotional requirements. A lot of developers in here. Is your job creative in its nature? Do you get to be creative? Sometimes? Okay. This is a chance for you to be extremely creative. You're not probably going to like this section too much, but if you think about it, it's a chance for you to be creative. So you have this wonderful list of emotional requirements sent to you by the BAs, and they said, hey, not only should the product function this way and it should perform this way, but you have all these emotional requirements. The person should feel this way and to achieve this goal. And they give it to you and they say, make it so. So how do you do it? There's infinite ways. It's a case-by-case basis. It's not a bullet list of points to help you, but each single thing is for you a problem to help figure out. Say, okay, when the user gets to the screen, they reported they want to feel like a sense of accomplishment. I did it. I ordered my product, I got to the thing. And it's on me to make that happen. All right, how can I evoke the sense of satisfaction when they get to this screen? That's an interesting problem for you as a developer to try and solve. Oh, and this other one, when they pushed this button, they wanted to feel this particular thing. How can I do that? So this is a chance for you to be extremely creative and have some fun. Moving on. Testing, measuring emotional requirements. This list is going to look very familiar to the first list. Now, there's no ideal way to test emotions. Ideally is telepathy. If you could read the user's mind, you say, here's our beta version, version 1, use it. And while they're using it, you're reading their mind, and they wanted to feel happy, and you read it, oh, they felt happy, but we can't read minds. And also, there are some new technologies that attempt to measure emotions, but we probably don't have access to them. The galvanic skin response is when you sweat, because you're nervous or you're anxious or something, you start to sweat. The galvanic skin response measures the electrical conductivity of your skin. It's going to be more conductive if it's sweaty and wet, and less so if you're not. So that's one way that they try and measure nervousness, measure emotions. Another is your pupils dilating or contracting. That's a way that you can measure. Tone of voice, brain waves, micro expressions. There's all these technologies that attempt to measure emotions. None of us have access to those. So unfortunately, we can't give the version 1 to our customers and say, let's hook you up to all these modules and watch your pupils while you use this and measure your emotions. So you have to rely on these next best methods. Here we are, interviews, discussions. It looks the same because it's almost the same. Now you've delivered them the software. They said they want to feel a sense of accomplishment. They use it. Interview them. Said, you wanted to feel this way, did you? And they say, yes, I did. Awesome, green check mark. If you can't talk to them, send them another survey poll. You indicated through this poll and through this ranking you wanted to feel these ways. You used our software, our initial version. Did you? This is how you can test emotions. Now, it's user reported, so you have to believe them, but that's the best you can do. You can't read their minds. You can't measure their corneas or whatever. Observation. Again, if you can watch the person. Remember at the beginning they were doing this, and now they're using your software, and they're like, uh-oh. Wait a second, they were doing that during the manual process. Now they're using our software and they're still scowling. That's probably not a good sign. Maybe that's an X. We did not achieve what we were trying to achieve. Role play. If you don't have access to them at all, you were using personas. Now you can pretend. You can put on that hat and say, I'm going to pretend I'm this user that's married and making this much money. It's not ideal, but at least you're considering the emotions. If I was that person, you're acting now. Role-playing. If I was that person and I wanted to feel a sense of satisfaction, would I? Yeah, I think I would. I'll give that a green check mark. Others, DEQ, Rice Profile, PREMO, these are specific questionnaires, polls that were designed to be sent to people to help measure their emotions. The most fun one, you can look up these DEQ, Discrete Emotions Questionnaire, Rice Profiles from the Ohio State University where I live. PREMO is the, what's the name of this thing? The Product Emotion Measurement Instrument. Here's how it works. The others use words or rankings, and people, read a word. Here's how this one works. It gives you a series of images. It says, at the beginning, when you did this, you said you wanted to feel like this. Now you're using our product. How does it make you feel at this point? You click this button, you got to the screen. How does it make you feel? And they said like this. Uh-oh. That's no good. So they use, sometimes images are a better way for people to report emotions than words. So there's already some questionnaires and polls that are ready-made for you to send out if you don't want to create your own. Finally, usability matrix of emotions. You have your Excel spreadsheet that says they wanted to feel this way when they clicked this button. Did they? This is where you put your red X's and your green check marks. So there's many, many methods to get and measure emotional requirements. Hopefully I've given you some leads that you can go and research if you're interested in this and take it back to your company and make it so. So let's bring this home. Oh, here's another exercise. This is where I ask folks they have their requirements listed, they have their purpose, and now they try and write down the emotional requirements in addition to the regular requirements they already have listed. Let's talk about placebos. I don't have much time. If you need to leave at 4:30 sharp, that's fine. If you want to stick around, I might go a few minutes early, or a few minutes over. So placebos. This comes from the Latin word placare, which means to pacify, to placate, to appease. The original sense of this came from, in the medieval times, if somebody died at the funeral, there would be family members mourning their loss, but sometimes they used to hire mourners, hired mourners, actors that would come to the funeral and cry and weep. But their emotions weren't seen as genuine. They were seen as inauthentic. And these mourners not only would cry and weep, they would chant Psalms 116, which is, I shall please the dead in the land of the living. So they were placating. Their emotions were considered insincere. They were called placebos. This is the original sense. So it seemed disingenuous. It seemed fake. So that's the original or the origin of where this term came from. Today, placebos are anything that or procedure that's intended solely for mental effects, in parentheses, but purports or claims to also have and may actually result in physical effects as well. This is some spooky, fascinating stuff. If you start digging into this, you'll find a rabbit hole that just gets you deeper and deeper. Placebos have not been studied for very long, and people still don't understand exactly how they work. I'll give you some examples that are fascinating, but people don't understand why placebos actually work. Placebos are actually used in three primary ways. One is clinical, to placate. So someone might go to a doctor and say, "Doctor, I feel all achy, I don't feel good," and the doctor examines them and can't find anything wrong with them, but the person still complains and says, "I don't feel well," so the doctor may give them a sugar pill. A pill that has no active ingredients, no drugs in it. And the doctor says, this should make you feel better, which isn't a lie, because the person will go home and they'll take the pill and they come back and say, "Doc, thanks for those pills. I really appreciate it." They don't know that it's a sugar pill, but they say, I feel better. Placebos are weird. Weirder yet, sometimes there are physiological changes. The person, maybe they're actually sick, but the doctor says, before I start prescribing actual drugs, I'm going to give them a placebo, just not tell them. The person goes, takes these placebos while the doctor arranges the real medicine, and the person comes back and says, "Doc, I feel better." And they say, yeah, I know, it's the placebo effect. And then they measure the person and they're like, they're actually better. They're actually better. Their body has changed. And this is why placebos are very spooky stuff. There's all sorts of interesting ethical things with doctors prescribing placebos, but it's fascinating stuff if you dig into it. But that's one way that clinical use of placebos is used. Another is experimental to control. In the U.S., if you are a company that wants to introduce a new drug to market, you have to pass a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled experiment that proves that your medicine can outperform a sugar pill when people don't know which it is. If it can't outperform a sugar pill, then your new drug isn't really that effective. So it has to outperform a placebo, and that's considered the gold standard of drug testing in the U.S. to introduce a new drug to the market. The one I'd like to talk about today is conditioning to appease, meaning to make someone accustomed to a certain set of circumstances or events, to make them placated. So Ellen Langer, a Harvard psychology professor, said the feeling that you have control over your world is a desirable state. All of us like to feel that we're in control of our fate. We're not a feather floating on the wind, and whichever way it blows, that's the way it goes. We like to feel that we have some control over our life. That's called the locus of control, how much things you actually control. What's fascinating is there's also the illusion of control, which is often much larger than the locus of control. We feel like we have much more control over our lives than we actually do. But every time you cross the street, you can't control cars that are going back and forth, and accidents happen. But we feel like we're in control. But the locus of control is much smaller than the illusion. But we still feel like we want to have control over our lives. This is where placebos attempting to placate or condition someone come in. So here's some examples. One is thermostats, the thing on the wall, and you go over and you turn it because you're cold or hot, and you change the temperature. There were studies done in many, many American office buildings throughout the states. I think this was from 2014. They found that almost half of those were fake. There were no wires behind them. So why are they on the wall? Because workers, they get cold and they say, oh, it's too cold in here. And they'll go over, they do this, and they go back to their desk, and after 10 minutes, they'll report, I feel better. I feel it's warmer in here. They don't know that it's a fake thermostat. It's just intended for mental, emotional effect. But it works. Rather than having everyone in the company able to go over and somebody else says, now it's too hot, and they turn it down. Now it's too cold, and they're turning the actual temperature up and down, and the system is going crazy, and it's breaking. They just put a bunch of fake ones up, and the workers are fine. They're happy. So that's an example of an analog placebo. Here's another one. Street crossing buttons or door closing buttons in elevators. They did a study in 2016, and about 1/3 of the street crossing buttons in New York City weren't connected. Some of them were broken, but most of them were never hooked up in the first place. But again, people like to feel that they have control over their lives. And what's interesting, they did a study where they had the researcher and they standing next to a non-functioning button, just taking notes, and people would come up and they'd push the button and they'd wait for the light to change, not knowing that the button doesn't do anything. The light's just on a timer. The researcher would tell the person, sir, we're doing a study. Just wanted you to know that that button is non-functioning. There's no wires connecting it. The person goes, oh, that's interesting. I go this way every day to work. I never knew that. What's even more fascinating is the researcher would be there the next day taking more notes, and here comes the same guy up to the corner. You know what he does? He pushes the button. And the researcher goes, sir, I spoke with you yesterday, and I told you that the button doesn't work. Why did you push it? And he says, well, just in case. That's the illusion of control. That's the locus. He wants to feel like he has control. Modern elevators, it's up to the individual building on whether they want to connect the door close button. So you go in and you push this, and the doors close. You're like, I did that. Sometimes it wasn't you. It's just on a timer. But those are to emotionally affect you. Here's some that are more close to us as technologists making software. Progress bars. It is notoriously difficult to measure how long it takes some processes to finish when you're doing software. I found examples going back to 1984 in Citrix systems where they had you would run some process and it had a series of dots that would show progress. It was just a script that put dots on the screen. It had no bearing on what was actually happening at all. It's just when the process was done, the dots would stop. But progress bars are oftentimes not very accurate. But still, what's interesting is studies have shown if you show nothing to the user, they click something and a process is running and there's no indication, it drives people crazy. What's going on? I don't know. Is it working? I don't know. So sometimes they have a spinner, which is better than nothing. But still, people are like, a spinner? Okay, I know it's working, but this could go on forever. So you put a progress bar, and even if it's inaccurate, even if the person knows it's inaccurate, like the guy that pushed the button, just in case, people report they're happy. At least it's not nothing. I want to know something's happening. It's not that dumb spinner that could go on forever. At least now we have this progress bar. I'm happy. And they say, it's not accurate. It's okay. I know. So that's another example of placebo. Refresh and save buttons. There was an application called Sketch, which was an online drawing thing, and you draw, and when you're happy, you click save, and you make some changes, and you click save. Well, in our constantly connected internet society now, they pushed out version 2 online, and they took away the save button because every stroke, everything you do automatically saves your work. People went crazy. They said, hey, where's the save button? I'm going to lose everything. And they said, no, it's always saved. You'll never lose it. They said, no, I'm nervous. So version 3, they added back a save button that was hollow. It was just like the fake thermostat or the door close button. There was nothing behind it, and users reported, thank goodness. Now they're always clicking save, even though it does nothing. Those are examples of digital placebos. If you have kids, this is another placebo. Your kid falls down, my knee. You can't see anything wrong, so you kiss it, and they go, ah. So these are examples of placebos attempting to affect emotions in people, even though there's no function behind it. So how can these help us see software in different ways. I'm going to go through these quickly. Isolating emotions. Imagine that some function or property is just a placebo to better consider the intended emotions that it should induce. So your software has features and functions, and they do things. Now, if you're a scientist running an experiment and there's 38 different variables that could affect the outcome, you don't want to run an experiment that has 38 variables, because you run it and the outcomes comes different every time you run the experiment. You have no clue which variable is affecting the output. So you try and isolate these variables so that some are static, some don't change, and you try and make as few variables as possible so when you run the experiment, you can adjust just those few. Same thing if you are testing and you want to say, boy, I know that when I click this button, it's supposed to take me to this page, and it's supposed to write a file, and it's supposed to send an email, and it's supposed to make the user feel a sense of accomplishment. That's a lot of things that are going on there. What if you imagined that it was all hollow? It didn't send an email. It was just a placebo, and all it was supposed to do was make the user feel a sense of accomplishment. Sometimes thinking about your software in that sense can help you see it in a different light, because you're isolating an emotion. Think, what if it was just to affect emotion? So that's one way that looking at software through the lens of placebos can be helpful. Exercise, I have people take their feature or function, and now they have a purpose, and now they have their emotional requirement. I try and have them think about, if it was just a fake button, what would happen? All right, there's my time up, so I'm almost done too. Bugs. Consider various scenarios to help determine intended and unintended results. So you have these emotional requirements. Imagine with the thermostat. Well, first of all, if you have a functional requirement that says, when you click this, this should happen. And I click it, and that thing does not happen, I would say it doesn't function properly. That's obviously a bug. It was supposed to do this. It didn't do that. That's a bug. It's a defect. And that's pretty clear cut. But sometimes with emotional requirements, it's more difficult. It's more nuanced. What if I say, when I click this button, the user should feel a sense of accomplishment? And they click it and they report back, I felt a sense of satisfaction and accomplishment. I go, great, green check mark. What if they click the button and they report back, I felt kind of satisfied, a little bit accomplished. I don't know. I'm like, oh, okay, is that a bug? I don't know. Is that something we need to fix? They felt a little accomplished. What if they report back, I felt angry? Not accomplished. Oh, well, that's definitely a bug. What if they say, the first time I clicked, I was like, yeah, and then the next time I clicked it, and then by the 15th time I clicked this button, I'm like, okay, I don't feel the sense of accomplishment anymore. I know where it's, and now repeated use has turned into an annoyance. These are, so emotional requirements can lead to more nuanced, weird bugs that you have to think about that sometimes aren't as obvious as a functional or performance or security bug. They're very black and white. So again, they try and think about their feature or function, and now they have their emotional requirement, and they try and think about different ways and different perspectives how it could be the nuance between the bugs and their emotional requirement that the users have written down in this exercise. Last way, ethics. Consider intentionally deceiving users for their benefit. This is a fascinating area. Intentionally lying to your users. Now, good design is honest is a famous tenet in software design. But sometimes it makes sense to lie to your users. There's some papers called How Should We Program Computers to Deceive, and another one from a few years later in 2013, Benevolent Deception in Human-Computer Interaction. According to Thomas Aquinas, there was 3 types of lies. There's malicious, which are intended to harm and malice. There's jocose, or there's officious, which are like jokes and stuff. Or jocose, that's the second type, which are like joking around, harmless. And there's officious. Those are lies that are meant to benefit someone. You're telling them a lie, but it's for their benefit. So not all lying is equal. I'll give you some examples that are fascinating times when products have lied to us for your benefit. One is from Netflix. When you go on Netflix, you're familiar with Netflix and online streaming services, and you watch a bunch of movies, and it starts to gather data and say, oh, this is the type you like, a lot of action movies and a lot of sci-fi and not so much romance. So when you click on movies recommended for you, it's going to give you those types of movies. Well, Netflix sometimes has outages. An entire segment will go down. So maybe they can't reach the database to say, oh, Damian, these are the types of genres that you like, and we can't report back because we have this outage. So rather than just report, sorry, we can't recommend any movies for you, that's a pretty upsetting user experience. What they do is just recommend generic movies. And I might not even notice that they're generic. I might say, that's weird. I don't normally watch those, but maybe their algorithm's a little funky, whatever. They're lying to me for my benefit. Here's a better example. There's these machines in the United States called Coinstar. They might have something similar here. They're in many grocery stores. It's a big machine, and once you have a whole bunch of change, a bunch of coins collected in a big bucket, you can take it to this machine, and you dump all the change in, and it sorts it, and at the end, it will print out a paper receipt saying, here's how much money this was worth, you can take it to the desk and they'll give you paper money. So instead of having a big bucket of change and coins, you can convert it to paper money. So that's how these machines work. And they rolled out version 1 and people started using them, and the reports came back. People were a little bit upset. I said, what's going on? Why are you upset with the machines? They said, well, I didn't know exactly how much was in this bucket, and I poured it in and it printed out a receipt, and I think the receipt was wrong. You think it was? Why? They said, machine printed out the receipt in like less than a minute. How could it have counted all that change in a minute? There's no way. So they started running diagnostics on the machine, the makers, and they said, the money taken in is the same as the money paid out. There's no mistake. So what's going on? Why are these people saying that we're shortchanging them? We're giving them not enough money. Because it was so fast. They just couldn't fathom that we have efficient machines. We're able to sort the change very quickly. It's working properly, but people didn't like it. You know what version 2 they did? They slowed it down. They put a fake delay, and they actually built a speaker into the machine that went the sound of coins sorting. Now, it would take 5 minutes, and it would print out a receipt, and people would go, now that is an accurate count. Users were more happy. They were lying to the users for their benefit. I have lots more examples of similar things, but since we're short on time, sometimes it makes sense to ethically lie to your users. Have anyone ever seen the movie Interstellar with Matthew McConaughey? Some have, some haven't. There's 2 artificial intelligence robots in the movie called TARS and Case, these 2 robots. And at one point, Matthew McConaughey, the astronaut, he's talking to one of the robots, and he says, hey, TARS, that's the name of the robot. He says, hey, what's your honesty parameter set at? And TARS says, it's 90%, sir. And the astronaut says, not only 90%? Why not 100? And the robot says, well, absolute honesty isn't always the most diplomatic nor the safest form of communication with emotional beings. And the astronaut says, all right, keep it at 90. It's fascinating, and there's even more articles that talk about the benefits and sometimes the necessity of lying to users for their benefit. So the last exercise is taking those features and functions, the emotional requirements, and thinking, if you had to lie to your user for their benefit, how would you go about doing it? This is a big hurdle for a lot of people to get over because lying is so built in to us that you don't do it. It's an unethical thing. But sometimes if it's an officious lie, it's for the user's benefit. It might make sense. If the most important thing is their emotional need, that's the keystone, and all your other requirements build up to that, it may make sense to lie to them for their own benefit. So thinking about software in terms of placebos could be useful. You can see things that you might not be able to see in other ways. Here's the summary. Successful businesses and people recognize the importance of emotions. People that have successful businesses said emotions are key to their success. A purpose of all software is to affect emotion. It's to be useful to help people to solve problems, and problems affect emotions. So all software, no matter what you're working on, affects emotions. That's important to recognize. Research by people that have been doing this longer and deeper indicates that emotional requirements can influence software acceptance and therefore should be considered. This is something you can tell your executives and your managers to sell them on this idea. Say, listen, it may work properly, it may perform wonderfully, but if it doesn't fulfill the user's emotional needs, they still may reject it. So therefore, we should probably start considering it because you want to make money. Requirements are simply wants or needs, as by definition, that can affect just the word itself or often originate from emotions. You're given a list of requirements. It's important to remember if you dig far enough down, they probably originated from emotions. There are many methods to get and to measure emotional requirements and infinite ways to develop them. I gave you a list of some today. Hopefully you'll take some of those back. Again, this slide deck is online at my website, and I'm sure the conference will make it available as well in case you want to look at that list. Finally, thinking about software in terms of placebos could be useful. It could give you insight that you might not get in other ways. The way we feel about software is important. Hopefully I've sold this idea. I've supported it with facts and evidence. You're now on board. You believe it to be true, and now I've given you some actions that you can go and make it so. Make better software that makes users happy and delighted, satisfied, feeling accomplished, and sells. That's all I got. Thank you so much, and keep exploring. Thank you so much.